This is Gary Miranda welcoming you back to Wake the Happy Words. Today I'm going to go out on a limb, and a rather long limb at that. I mentioned at the beginning of these podcast episodes that there were some poems I never read at readings because they're too long to expect an audience to sit through. Some poets wouldn't worry about such considerations, but I grew up in a family that didn't read poetry, a family of 5 brothers, all jocks, whose reading material consisted mainly of comic books and cereal boxes. I still think that the backs of cereal boxes is where poetry should be published. People will read anything on the back of a cereal box. Will read even the nutrition ingredients on the side. All that poetry would get into their bloodstream and start doing its work before they knew what hit them. I also happen to think that turning one's back on one's roots is self-corrupting. In short, accessibility is important to me, so much so that I like to think that I write poems for people who don't read poetry. I don't flatter myself that I've always been able to reach that audience, but I can say with Willie Nelson, you were always on my mind. I've referred several times to the 2 long poems at the end of my first 2 books. Today I'm going to read the latter of these, called The World That Is Offered, in its entirety. Trigger warning. The sequence consists of 3 sections of 6 poems each, with each poem consisting of 3 8-line stanzas. The musical interludes will separate the 3 sections, not the individual poems. In short, it's a bit of a slog, so if you want to excuse yourself from this episode, I'll understand. But if you're up for it, I'm happy to have you along. The sequence was written about a year after I became a father at the age of 42 and is dedicated to my son, Nicholas. Each section has a sort of mascot. In the first, it's the mockingbird. In the second, it's the steelhead. And in the third, it's the springbok. You may recall that I've already read one poem from that section. Taken together, the 3 sections capture some of the wonder, joy, and dread of becoming a father. Here we go. The World That Is Offered, for Nicholas. Part 1, Even in the Dark. 1. Tonight, outside my window, a mockingbird runs through his list, his repertoire of twitters, chorts, glissandos, and olays. I listen, but lose count, and my 1-year son, immune to impresarios, sleeps right through it. The mockingbird could be his patron saint, for, like the bird, his gift for imitation makes me smile, even in the dark. I hear him sometimes, mornings, in his crib, performing small etudes. He pats his toys for counterpoint, piano, pianissimo, he and the dawn, andante mon anthropo. When I go to pick him up, he is always standing, as if the world needed a transfusion, and he is the only one with the right blood type. I think it must be O. He says O. The mockingbird will never earn a living, not if he keeps this up. I want to tell him, whatever the world means, it isn't simple. Learn a trade. Think of the snapping turtle, whose 400 pounds per square inch of jaw provides a firm grasp of the essentials. But the mockingbird isn't big on survival. He's just here and keeps on noticing it. 2. To become a father at 42 is to know a whole host of angular surprises that somehow had escaped you. In the night, the least sounds announce dispensable, and you wonder who they mean. The muse, who up till now has been voluptuous and kind, begins to resemble your mother, or your wife, who begins to resemble your muse. It is most confusing. You take to putting coasters under your drinks. and think that your wife's habit of clipping coupons is perhaps not as nutty as you'd imagined. You wink at the world, and the world says, "Grow up." You thought that's what you were doing. But now machines, which have always had the edge on you, are all adding machines. Even the lawnmower, and you have no lawn. You intended only to visit. That's what you said. Now someone calls your bluff, and you realize that that someone has your eyes and probably isn't planning to give them back. You try to think of what is important. Your life has managed to follow you this far, sometimes close, sometimes the way that dust is visible and indicates a recent passerby who must, it seems, be you and is your father. 3. Such fat discrepancies foil us all in time. Too many choices, too many expectations. Above the mockingbird's concatenations, above the sound of distant railroad cars uncoupling in the dark, above the rain just beginning to fall, which is the sound of my childhood in Seattle, something hums. It made me think just now of 48, and me alone in bed, home from school, pretending to be sick, and the baby Ben humming its slow minutes, my mother gone, shopping, I think, and the mirror starting to move, and the sound of objects falling throughout the house, and that terrible sound from underneath, the earth changing its mind. But where I am now, nothing moves but time. I'm sitting here, the desk is solid oak, the typewriter has interchangeable balls that stay in place unless I decide to change them. The overhead casts a consistent shadow, doesn't rise or set. The rain keeps coming down, and the cat hasn't moved for hours, except to yawn. And now and then the coupled freight cars pass as if nothing has happened, and nothing has. 4. Against the grain of any solid house, the world doesn't love us one by one. I don't mean summer houses, of course, which hang like the matter at hand above an argument for spontaneous feelings, or houses that are rented in cities or towns everywhere, and that, to nourishment, are like those catalogs of daily minimum requirements. I mean a house whose grace, conventional or not, is adequate to the need for grace, and which, therefore, betokens a kind of freedom for those who inhabit it, summer or winter, a house, let's say, franked by stentorian laurels. Such a house survives in my body now. Wherever I go, the compass point of caring wavers toward that north, though where it stood a freeway runs, and where the upstairs bedroom window once looked out upon the slow unfolding of hawthorn buds, or the basil girls sunbathing across the street, cars careen toward Canada, or south toward Oregon. That house, I began to say, survives in my body now and nowhere else. Between our bodies and the world, what barriers do we raise? 5. These days, a woman I love, a child I love, move the air of their lives from place to place in little imperceptible shifts. Or else one picks up an object and hands it to the other, simply. Or else they are both asleep, as now, and their breathing becomes the object one gives to the air and the air gives to the other. I think it is time to make my peace with objects, whatever their practical use. Ceramic cups I keep my pencils in, if only because, like all good reasons not to be alarmed, they won't hold water. Placemats macrameed in adult education classes. Little magnets shaped like owls or bunnies, which, placed on the refrigerator, slip at the least touch of a shopping list. Because when a child begins to walk, the furniture grows new edges, hexagons from squares, and knives hang from the usually peaceful plants, while over in the corner a single object, who knows which one, rehearses its nomenclature of ball or train or duck, whereas till now it has slept in its safe shape of wood or plastic, happy and anonymous and whole. 6. Man gives proof of reflection, Herder writes, when out of the whole drifting dream of images that passes by his senses, he can collect, in one moment of wakefulness, himself, can pick out for himself characteristics which show that this is the object and no other. Reflection, in other words, is one of the ways by which we cheat the obvious of its power. I don't mean to complain, it is all right, but what is this need humming in the night that is not my next-door neighbor's electric typewriter, that is not insomnia taking a short stroll, that is not the sex life of teenagers tuning up? The earth, I think, is a curveball God is throwing in slow motion, and you and I are here just as it leaves his hand. It is all right, but what is this need humming in the night that is not a total eclipse of the moon, just missing, that is not the player piano of time, that is not anything you or I will ever explain, although we undo ourselves line by line until we are all paper, like a kite some child has let slip? It is all right, but what is this need humming in the night? Part 2. The First Morning of Fathers. 1. The first morning of fathers is horizontal. It seems to go on forever. But that is because the sky, like a mother with many children, has been up the entire night, pressing it out. On the Clackamas River Road, the highway bends at a clearing, and the river, which up till now has been the highway's sibling, almost a twin, looms like a train of thought that doesn't love us. At just this place, perverse, I park my car, exchange my boots for waders, don my vest of the many pockets, and, rod in hand, head down to the river. It is morning. At home, a woman sleeps in our bed alone, dreaming of rivers with many rooms, while in an adjoining room our one-year son begins to nuzzle the world, the one he lets us use when he's not using it. I think of him as the current hugs my legs and holds on tight, as if I were responsible. I think, if love were enough, life would be too easy, and make my first cast across the river and let the line drift down and reel it in, invisible almost, but in its way, the surest tie I have to anything. 2. Birds on the river know who owns the morning. Not the heron so much, they're downriver pretending to be a branch. You have to imagine the sky crosshatched by their flight paths, thick or fine, variegated, a web they go on stitching, a safety net for the dead, to know what I mean. Even wisdom gets boring, even your own. I have lived on this planet for more than 40 years, and what do I know? There is a town called Boring, Oregon, which has its beauty. There is a town called Wisdom, Montana, where I have been. The sound of the bus pulling into Wisdom is the sound of the future snapping shut its sample case of alternatives. It is the sound of all the decisions you never made trying to talk at once and being successful. It is the sound of the last gunslinger weeping. Meanwhile, back in Boring, a baby is trying hard to be born, his elongated head just beginning to crown for the anxious doctor and nurses, his lungs rehearsing their first scream in a silence as dark as a gun barrel. But here on the river, morning, its matter-of-fact tenderness breaks, and the birds begin again to piece it together. 3. The steelhead come back to the river. They are not salmon. They are not swallows returning to Capistrano. They are, as the guidebooks say, seagoing trout, though they do not believe in guidebooks or in the sea with its loud need for approval roaring like that. They believe in the river, in a certain insistent urge for which the river's a metaphor, but a good one. They believe in this so firmly that there are people who line the banks in cuneiforms of praise, trying to make themselves invisible. Somewhere else, on subways, invisible people raise one arm like this. The subway track runs like a steel river under the city, and people rise early to line its banks. And the sound that the subway makes is like the name of the river, Clackamas. But I do not think it is praise. I do not think the steelhead are fond of praise. I do not seem to know what they are fond of. The metaphors I offer them are not the metaphors they want, or even good ones. And yet the swallows, in spite of the tourists, return, and the subway comes, and the steelhead mouths the lure like an infant mouthing its first word. And you have only an instant to set the hook. Hard. 4. On the river, Rain is a child practicing scales, who plays on the white keys only, except they are gray. The child has not had lessons, and yet he knows a scale when he hears one, and so he plays it over and over, variations on a theme without the variations. At 42, a man should know the real name for rain. I've never understood how it comes down, evaporates, and then comes down again. Perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps we shouldn't believe what we haven't seen, or perhaps we shouldn't believe what we could see if a microscope decided to prove it to us. That rain, for example, which seems in our projected pane to be tear-shaped, really resembles little hamburger buns, the last fast food, surely, this side of heaven. At 42, I'd rather believe that the river's sentence goes on forever, and that the rain and I are simply punctuation. Up river, the small parentheses of the drift I fish in opens, down river, it closes. I'm here, a comma, at most a semicolon. Punctuation, I like to tell my students, isn't important, by which I mean you should try to do it right. 5. Although I know that words were never intended to carry the weight of what we know, but like the spider's filament were meant to catch intact droplets of a mist through which we call to one another for directions, precisely because we are not fish or swallows. In short, although I know it is unlikely, I like to think the fish are waiting for words, for something which, in my good moments, I could give them. I think of the lovely fish, their silver sides, their underbellies. Why should I deceive them? Deception is not the point. I think of the fish as balancing in the cool thought of the river, moving for now neither forward nor backward, but only waiting. I do not believe my lures. Why should the fish believe them? I do not believe they will mistake me for heron or bear and be afraid. I do not think they will mistake me for brother or father and rush into my arms. I think we are equals. I think that our balancing strengths are like the thought of the river deep in the brain of the fish, against which the fish for now move neither forward nor backward, but hover, waiting, perhaps for words, although I know it is unlikely. 6. Driving home skunked, I think any problem that has an answer isn't important enough. Coleridge knew. He woke one night, Hartley asleep and Sarah not yet born, and found the windows flowered with frost, an analogue of his mind's intricate beauty hardening. The French have a phrase for things you should have said, but think of only later. Pensées d'escalier, thoughts of the stair. At Bonneville Dam, steelhead are climbing the stairs, not thinking at all, perhaps, though some of them stall like students lost for an answer and never make it. And then there's the soul's terrible climbing toward God, and TV sets losing their vertical hold, and my grandmother mounting the stairs of the nursing home with the help of an aide who never watched her dance to the tune of Ragtime Cowboy Joe, her skirts hiked modestly up, and her 5 grandsons clapping. As the fisherman said to the statistician, hell, there ain't no average, it varies. Hitting the brake, I swerved to avoid a dead raccoon on the road, then turn off the windshield wipers. The sun is back, like a lover who can't quite leave for good. The sky is explaining this, and though I try hard to listen, I really don't care. I need the world that much. Part 3, The Noon of Everything. 1. The sunflower, that Baroque philosopher, nods in the west garden. Not that we have an east or a north garden. It is a phrase beloved of your mother, as is the flower, which wakes each day hefty and corrigible, rendering her grandiloquent with praise. Your mother is bilingual. She speaks love in at least 2 tongues I can think of, fluently. Once on a field trip, she found a fish gasping in a puddle on Sauvie Island. Pregnant with you, she picked the damn thing up and stumbled with it all the way to the lake. The fish swam off, happy, your mother says. An eagle, we conjectured, might have dropped it. One eye was gone, one was all bloody. We talked about it driving back. She said, some sad things happen, even without man. If no one knows they're sad, they're not sad, I thought. But she was right, of course. That night, I listened for your heartbeat with a glass. Not finding it at first, I almost lied. Then I found it. Sounds just fine, I said. She smiled her smile and let it go at that. Some happy things happen too. It evens out. 2. The sunflower is a ball, which is to say it is clearly not a dog, your other noun. Placed above your reach, it verifies that you are the issue here, like gravity. The sun, its namesake, likewise is a ball, the dog day waits to chase, at your behest. Ball, you say. Doggy, you say. Papa? What, I say. Lidle, lidle, lidle. You cultivate your words, your breath tending each syllable, the way a man gone blind might feel his way through a grove of rhododendrons, or the way that Galileo, old and blind, puttered in his garden in Arcetri after the Holy Office had made him promise not to move the earth. A man of his word, he couldn't resist, still poking around. A word for you is a happenstance of light, a flower which, if it's going to open at all, opens when the world is paying attention to something else. And then, some casual noon, astounds the local inhabitants who pass, reminded, for the moment, that although no truth can survive the blight of words, things matter, some things more than others. 3. The sunflower is conspicuously maned and leonine. Amazed, I do not trust it. A flower taller than me can mean no good. And look, it sidles closer to the house each day, it seems, frowsy with intent. It signifies the noon of everything, a time unloved by fishermen and poets. As Van Gogh guessed, the flip side of despair. Consider the docile springbok. When the buck wishes to mate, he brushes the doe's flank with one of his forelegs, as if asking permission. What Chaucer meant, perhaps, by gentillesse. The lion stalks the springbok. When he strikes, the savannah shakes its dusty head like a man startled momentarily from a nap, and then, nothing amiss, nods off again. Fishing is something else. Only the fish who decides to kill gets caught, a kind of justice. Moreover, the fish has a fisheye lens, which means that riverbanks, the trees, the sky, myself, surround the fish as the world surrounds a son before he becomes a father. This, at bottom, is what his existence means. He is the center. Among the fish, there are no Galileos. 4. When the springbok, locked in the lion's jaws, knows he's the one, it makes him singular in ways no human mind can ever imagine. The other springbok, the zebras, the wildebeests, watch from a safe distance, almost reverent. Not that they learn. I don't believe they learn. And what I say of the springbok, you have to think past the unpleasantness of it and the fear, like a root canal in the mind's eye. But it's there, and the springbok knows. The thing about despair is it misses the point. No one deserves anything. I tell you this because it is clear, as few things are, and because whatever knowledge we hope to live by winds back always and eventually to just such stark beginnings. The morning you were born, your mother's face bore witness, as did yours, your crimped eyes already edged with pain. Though the rules change, though the thin chambers of our usual discourse anticipate no realities which adhere, I wish for you unshakable faith in a wisdom that will outlive the springbok or the lion, you or me, my love for you, huge as it is, and the heir's apparent kindness as it kills. 5. Nicholas Nicolakimu, I'm trying to say a simple thing clearly. Not the sun again with its long skein of laughter, nor flowers that rise like apples at the sills of all our windows, though they are real enough, those flowers, that sun. Something about love, I think, though love can be as scarce as money, and I never could tell decimal points from commas. I do tell time, and yet it won't be long because of digital clocks before the term clockwise makes no sense. And this is sad. Even this minor wisdom, tick and talk, is something we can hardly afford to lose. A girl sits in her small room deciding to cut her hair or not to cut her hair. It is like that. It is that important. And this is just one example. I think of the people who started the great cathedral at Chartres, and the point at which the stone took on its own sublime, perhaps, but also perverse purpose. And they trying to tell their children the name for this. Nicholas, the little hand is on you. And love, I think, is a blank page of forget from which still a few names are missing. 6. As sunlight will catch the round edge of an object, a teacup say, and eliminate contour and color, anything the eye could fasten on or name, is the way you laugh on the intake, happy, one of God's attention-getting devices that still works. In closing, I mention this. As in a parade of elephants, the last should be the happiest and be remembered. Your mother once at a pachydermaless zoo with a group of school kids complained, "It's hard for children not to see an elephant." It was as if an angel had started discussing baseball, and I, who understand baseball, didn't know enough about angels to keep up the conversation. It's hard for anyone, I thought, but didn't say it. I felt like that when you were in her womb, reluctant to come out, your speech refined to an intricate combination of kicks, although the meaning came through clear. You liked it in there. Nicholas, we live in the world that is offered, however foreign it seems. If forgive is the right word, I say, learn to forgive the world. If world is the right word, I leave it to you. Once again, thanks for listening. This is Gary Miranda saying with Theodore Roethke, wake the happy words.